Michael Carter stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, gazing out at the above-ground pool that had dominated his backyard for the past 15 years. The morning sun reflected off the water's surface, highlighting the small tears in the liner, and the rust began to form on the metal frame. The once vibrant blue had faded to a dull aqua, telling the story of countless summer days, birthday parties, and neighborhood gatherings. At 52, Michael found himself in a house that had grown quieter with each passing year. His son Jason was finishing his second year of medical school in Boston, while his daughter Emma had recently accepted a teaching position in Colorado. The family home in suburban Mapleton felt increasingly empty, and the pool, once the center of their summer lives, had become more of a maintenance burden than a source of joy. Another weekend of chemicals and cleaning, Michael muttered to himself, sipping his coffee. He'd spent the previous summer meticulously maintaining the pool, only for it to sit unused for weeks at a time. The pool filter hummed in the background, a constant reminder of the electricity it consumed. The decision had been forming in his mind for months, but this morning something crystallized. It was time for a change. Michael set down his mug and pulled out his tablet, beginning to research the proper procedures for dismantling an above-ground pool. He found himself bookmarking pages about backyard transformations, particularly drawn to images of cozy patio spaces with fire pits and garden areas. As he scrolled through options, Michael caught movement from the corner of his eye. Through the kitchen window, he could see his neighbor, Patricia Willoughby, standing at her fence line, arms crossed, watching his backyard with that familiar pinched expression. Patricia and her husband had moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago, and while most neighbors had welcomed them warmly, Patricia had quickly established herself as someone with strong opinions about how others should maintain their properties. Michael gave a polite wave, but Patricia merely narrowed her eyes before turning back toward her house. He sighed, remembering the 3 separate occasions when Patricia had commented on his pool maintenance schedule, suggesting it wasn't frequent enough and expressing concerns about mosquito breeding grounds despite Michael's diligent care. Later that afternoon, Michael called his children to share his decision. Both were supportive, though nostalgic. "Remember when you taught me to swim there?" Emma asked, her voice warm with memories. "And the time Jason jumped from the deck and nearly gave me a heart attack?" Michael laughed. "Hey, I was trying to impress Caitlin from down the street," Jason defended himself. "Well, I think a patio sounds great, Dad," Emma said. "You deserve a space that works for your life now, not just preserving things for when we visit." After hanging up, Michael felt reassured. He spent the rest of the evening mapping out a timeline, ordering a dumpster for the following weekend, and researching the necessary permits. Before bed, he walked around his yard with a flashlight, measuring and envisioning the space transformed. The old pool had served its purpose, creating 15 years of family memories. Now it was time for something new. As he turned off his bedroom light, Michael noticed Patricia's kitchen light was still on, and he could see her silhouette at the window, looking out toward his backyard. Something about her posture suggested disapproval, but Michael dismissed the thought. This was his property and his decision. He had no idea how strongly Patricia would oppose this change or how far she would go to try to stop it. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for Michael's project: clear skies, moderate temperatures, and a light breeze. He woke at 6 a.m., earlier than usual for a weekend, excitement and determination propelling him out of bed. After a quick breakfast, he changed into his work clothes. Worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, and sturdy boots he purchased specifically for the pool removal project. At 7:30 a.m., Michael started the pool pump to begin draining the water. He had researched extensively and learned that the proper way to drain a pool was to direct the water slowly into the storm drain rather than letting it flood his yard or his neighbor's properties. He had even called the city's public works department earlier in the week to confirm he was following proper protocol. The representative had sounded bored, explaining that this was a common call and assuring him his method was correct as long as the pool wasn't treated with chemicals within the past 48 hours. "Morning, Michael." Finally getting rid of that money pit, called Roger from next door, leaning over the fence with a mug of coffee in hand. Roger and his wife had been neighbors for nearly 20 years, their children growing up alongside Michael's. "You know what," Michael replied, smiling. "Emma and Jason are hardly ever home anymore, and maintaining it just for myself seems silly." "Smart move. Sarah and I filled in our pool after the kids left for college. Best decision we ever made. Let me know if you need an extra pair of hands." Michael had already informed his immediate neighbors about his plans the week before. Most had reacted like Roger, with understanding and offers of help. He wasn't surprised. In this neighborhood, people generally respected each other's property decisions. As the water level began to drop, Michael busied himself gathering the tools he would need. A cordless drill with various bits, heavy-duty gloves, bolt cutters, and several large tarps to protect his lawn. The rented dumpster had been delivered the previous evening and sat in his driveway, ready to receive the dismantled pool pieces. Around 10 a.m., Michael noticed movement at Patricia's house. She appeared at her kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, staring directly at his backyard operation. When she realized Michael had seen her, she didn't wave or acknowledge him, but continued to watch with obvious disapproval, her lips pressed into a thin line. Michael shrugged and returned to his work. He had never particularly cared for Patricia's opinions, especially considering she had lived in the neighborhood for only a fraction of the time he had. By noon, the pool was nearly drained. Michael took a lunch break, sitting on his back porch with a sandwich and cold drink, surveying his progress with satisfaction. The old pool, now revealed without its concealing water, looked even more worn than he had realized. Faded patches marked the water line, and small cracks have formed in several places along the bottom. After lunch, Michael began the actual dismantling, starting with the ladder and skimmer box. He worked methodically, removing each piece, cleaning it of debris, and carrying it to the dumpster. The work was physical and demanding, but there was something therapeutic about it. Each piece removed represented another step toward his new vision for the space. Throughout the afternoon, Michael could feel Patricia's gaze following him from various windows of her house. Once, when he looked up, he caught her on her phone, gesturing animatedly toward his yard while speaking to someone. He found it odd but dismissed it. People had the right to their opinions, after all. By 3 p.m., Michael had removed all the peripheral components and had begun to disassemble the metal frame. He was making good progress, his shirt soaked with sweat, but his spirit buoyed by the visible transformation taking place. The exposed liner lay flat against the ground now, looking deflated and ready for removal. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't immediately notice Patricia marching across her lawn toward his gate, her face set in determination and a thick neighborhood association binder clutched in her hands. The confrontation Michael had subconsciously been expecting was about to begin. Michael was struggling with a particularly stubborn bolt when the sound of his gate latch clicking open caught his attention. He turned to see Patricia Willoughby striding into his backyard without invitation, her neighborhood association binder clutched against her chest like a shield. Her blonde highlighted hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she wore what Michael had come to think of as her official complaint outfit, pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the neighborhood logo embroidered on the chest. "Michael Carter, what do you think you're doing?" Patricia demanded, her voice carrying across the yard with practiced authority. Michael straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "Hello, Patricia. I'm removing my pool, as I'm sure you can see." Patricia marched closer, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the dismantled pieces scattered across the yard. "You can't just do this without proper consultation. This pool is a neighborhood fixture." Michael blinked, momentarily confused. "It's my pool, Patricia, on my property. It's a water feature that affects the entire aesthetic of Maple Lane," she countered, opening her binder to a tabbed section. "As secretary of the Neighborhood Enhancement Committee, I must inform you that all major property alterations visible from adjacent yards need to be submitted for review." "There is no Neighborhood Enhancement Committee," Michael said calmly, setting down his wrench. "We have a neighborhood association that organizes the block party and collects dues for the holiday lights. That's it." Patricia's cheeks flushed. "The committee was formed last month. I sent emails." "Which I didn't receive," Michael replied. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. "Regardless, Patricia, our neighborhood covenants only restrict front yard changes. Backyards are at the homeowner's discretion." "That's a technicality," Patricia sniffed. "My property directly overlooks your yard. Did you consider how this affects my property value? My kitchen window has had a water view for 2 years. My home was marketed with seasonal water views when we purchased it." Michael fought the urge to laugh at the absurdity of calling a glimpse of his above-ground pool a water view. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry if you feel that way, but I've maintained this pool for 15 years. It's reached the end of its lifespan, and I've decided not to replace it." "My children were looking forward to using it," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. This genuinely surprised Michael. "Your children? Patricia, you've never once asked if they could use the pool." "Well, they're in college now, but when they visit," she waved her hand dismissively. "That's not the point. The point is, you're disrupting the established character of the neighborhood. I've already had 3 neighbors express concern." Michael glanced around pointedly at the empty yards surrounding them. "Which neighbors would those be?" Patricia clutched her binder tighter. "I'm not at liberty to say, but as a 15-year resident, I would think you have more respect for community standards." "I respect my neighbors, Patricia," Michael said firmly, "which is why I informed everyone about my plans last week. No one objected." "You didn't inform me," Patricia said, her voice taking on an injured tone. "I knocked on your door twice. You weren't home, so I left a note in your mailbox." "I never received any note," she insisted, though something flickered in her eyes that made Michael suspect she had simply thrown it away unread. "I'm sorry about that," Michael said, not believing her but choosing diplomacy. "But as I said, this is my property, and I already started the project." The dumpster is rented, and I've taken the day off work. Patricia's expression hardened. This isn't over, Michael. There are channels for these matters. Proper procedures. Patricia, Michael said, his patience waning, I need to ask you to leave my property now. I have work to finish before dark. You'll regret this, she said, the phrase coming out like a line from a bad movie. She turned on her heel and marched back toward the gate, her back rigid with indignation. As Michael watched her storm across to her own yard, phone already pressed to her ear, he had an uneasy feeling that she wasn't really making empty threats. He returned to his work with less enthusiasm than before, wondering what channels Patricia planned to pursue and whether he should have handled the confrontation differently. From his peripheral vision, he could see Roger watching from his side yard, giving him a sympathetic thumbs up. At least he had allies in the neighborhood. Michael resumed his work, determined not to let Patricia's interference derail his plans. After Patricia's departure, Michael tried to refocus on his work. The confrontation had left him unsettled, but he was determined not to let it derail his weekend project. He made steady progress through the afternoon, dismantling the metal frame section by section and carefully folding the liner to prevent tears that might make it difficult to remove. Around 3:30 p.m., Roger wandered over with 2 cold beers. Thought you might need this, he said, handing one to Michael. Saw the Patricia situation. That woman is something else. Michael accepted the beer gratefully. Thanks. I don't understand why she's so invested in my pool. Roger took a swig from his bottle. Control pure and simple. Sarah says she tried to report the Hendersons for painting their shed unauthorized beige last month. They shared a laugh, and Michael felt his tension easing. He and Roger chatted for a few minutes before Roger headed back to his own yard, leaving Michael to continue his work with renewed energy. By 4 p.m., Michael had removed the last sections of the pool's frame and was rolling up the liner when the distinct sound of car doors shutting in front of his house caught his attention. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked around to the front yard, surprised to see a police cruiser parked at the curb. 2 officers, one older with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face, the other younger with a military-style haircut, were making their way up his front walk. Afternoon officers, Michael called, trying to sound casual despite the anxiety suddenly knotting his stomach. Can I help you with something? The older officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, nodded politely. Good afternoon, sir. Are you Michael Carter? Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Martinez. This is Officer Reynolds. We received a complaint about some activity on your property today. Something about illegal destruction of community property and potential environmental hazards. Mind if we take a look around? Michael's confusion quickly gave way to understanding. This is about my pool, isn't it? The younger officer glanced at his notepad. Caller reported improper disposal of a neighborhood recreational facility and dangerous handling of pool chemicals creating a hazard to surrounding properties. Michael couldn't help but laugh, though he stopped when he saw the officer's expressions. I'm sorry, but that's completely ridiculous. It's my personal pool that I've owned for 15 years. I'm removing it from my private property. That's what we figured, Martinez said, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first frivolous call they responded to, but we still need to check it out since the complaint mentioned chemical hazards. Of course, Michael said, gesturing toward his backyard. Please come see for yourselves. As the officers followed him around the house, Michael caught sight of Patricia standing on her back deck, arms crossed triumphantly as she watched the police approach his yard. The smug satisfaction on her face made his blood boil, but he kept his composure. In the backyard, the officers surveyed the dismantled pool parts and the nearly empty liner. As you can see, Michael explained, I'm removing my above-ground pool. I drained it properly through the filtration system into the storm drain, as per city guidelines. I haven't used chemicals in it for over a week. Officer Reynolds noted something on his pad while Martinez walked the perimeter of the yard, looking at the neatly organized pool components. Do you have proof of ownership? Martinez asked, his tone professional but not accusatory. Absolutely, Michael replied. I can show you the original receipt, and of course, the pool is clearly within my property lines, which are defined in my deed. And the dumpster rental is permitted? Yes, I have all the paperwork inside. Would you like to see it? Martinez nodded, and Michael led them toward the house. As they passed by the fence nearest Patricia's property, Michael noticed her moving closer, clearly trying to overhear their conversation. One more question, Officer Martinez said, lowering his voice slightly. The complainant mentioned this was a neighborhood recreational facility. Is this pool part of a homeowners association common area? No, sir, Michael said firmly. It's my personal pool that I purchased and have maintained at my own expense for 15 years. The caller is my neighbor who moved in 2 years ago and apparently believes she has some say in what I do with my property. The older officer's expression softened with understanding, and he exchanged a knowing glance with his partner. Inside his home, Michael led the officers to the kitchen table where he had organized all his paperwork in a folder before starting a project. He'd always been methodical that way. Emma often teased him about his dad folders for every household project. Now he was grateful for the habit. "Here's the original receipt from Backyard Oasis," Michael said, sliding a faded but legible document across the table. The paper showed his name, address, and the purchase price of $4,200 for a 24-foot round above-ground pool kit, dated 15 years earlier. "And here's my property survey from when I refinanced 5 years ago, clearly showing the property lines." Officer Martinez examined the documents while Officer Reynolds glanced around Michael's kitchen. The younger officer's eyes lingered on a family photo showing Michael with his children, standing beside the very pool he was now dismantling. "Is this recent?" Reynolds asked, gesturing to the picture. Michael smiled. "No, that's about 8 years ago. The kids are grown now, one in medical school, one teaching in Colorado. That's partly why I'm removing the pool. Nobody uses it anymore except me, and maintaining it just doesn't make sense." Martinez nodded, handing the receipt back. "And here's your dumpster permit." Michael produced the paperwork from the city, along with a receipt from the rental company. "I also called Public Works to confirm the proper drainage procedures. I spoke with someone named Barbara on Tuesday. She confirmed I was following proper protocol." "Did your neighborhood association require any special permits for removal?" Martinez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "We don't have those kinds of restrictions," Michael explained. "Our HOA is minimal, mostly handles the community entrance landscaping and organizes the annual block party. There are no architectural review requirements for backyards." Martinez jotted something in his notebook. "Ms. Willoughby mentioned she's on some neighborhood enhancement committee?" Michael tried not to roll his eyes. "That's news to me. As far as I know, no such committee exists, at least not officially. Patricia moved in 2 years ago and has been enthusiastic about neighborhood aesthetics." The officer's mouth twitched slightly at Michael's diplomatic phrasing. "I see. And she claimed this was a community pool?" "It's never been a community pool," Michael said firmly. "My insurance wouldn't cover that. A few neighbors' kids have swum in it over the years when invited, but it's always been private." As if on cue, Michael's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Roger. "Patricia is pacing on her deck watching your house. Everything oak." Michael showed the officers the text. "That's my neighbor Roger. He's lived next door for 20 years and can verify everything I'm telling you." Officer Reynolds looked to his partner. "I think we have enough information, sir." Martinez nodded and stood up. "Mr. Carter, it appears you're well within your rights to remove your own pool from your own property. Sorry for the interruption to your weekend." "No need to apologize," Michael said, walking them back outside. "You're just doing your job." As they emerged into the backyard, Michael noticed Patricia had moved to the very edge of her property, phone in hand, clearly trying to document the police visit. Her posture straightened when she saw the officers, and she began walking toward Michael's gate with purpose. "Would you like me to come over there and explain our findings, ma'am?" Officer Martinez called out to her, his voice carrying easily across the yards. Patricia froze momentarily, then nodded and retreated to her deck, clearly expecting the officers to follow. Martinez turned to Michael. "We'll handle this. You can get back to your project." "I appreciate that," Michael said sincerely. "For what it's worth," Martinez added quietly, "we get calls like this more than you think. People with too much time and too little boundary awareness." Reynolds suppressed a smile and added, "Make sure you document the rest of your removal process with photos, just in case." Michael nodded, understanding the implied suggestion. "Will do. Thanks again, officers." As the police made their way to Patricia's yard, Michael returned to work on the pool liner, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He caught Roger's eye over the fence and gave him a thumbs up. The situation was resolving itself, and he could already envision the new patio taking shape where the pool had been. A different kind of gathering space, but one that would create its own new memories. Patricia Willoughby stood on her immaculately maintained deck, arms crossed over her chest, watching as officers Martinez and Reynolds made their way across her perfectly trimmed lawn. She had positioned herself strategically, standing tall of the sun, highlighting her recently highlighted hair, her neighborhood binder prominently displayed on the patio table beside a pitcher of what looked like freshly made lemonade and 3 glasses. "Thank you for responding so quickly, officers," Patricia said as they approached, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to managing situations. "I prepared some documentation regarding our neighborhood standards that Mr. Carter is clearly violating." Officer Martinez nodded politely, but remained standing at the base of her deck stairs. "Ms. Willoughby, we just finished speaking with Mr. Carter and examining his property." "Excellent," Patricia said, reaching for her binder. "Then you understand the severity of the situation. That pool has been a feature of this neighborhood for years, and its removal without proper consultation is a clear violation of." "Ma'am," Officer Reynolds interrupted gently, Mr. Carter provided us with proof of ownership for the pool. It's his personal property, purchased and maintained solely by him for the past 15 years. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, technically he purchased it, but it's become a neighborhood amenity. My property was marketed with seasonal water views when we purchased it 2 years ago. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Ms. Willoughby, a neighbor's above-ground pool visible from your window doesn't constitute protected water views under any city ordinance I'm aware of. But the neighborhood aesthetic is not governed by any legally binding covenant that would prevent Mr. Carter from removing his own pool, Martinez finished for her. He's complied with all city requirements for the dumpster permit and proper drainage procedures. Patricia's cheeks flushed pink. What about the hazardous chemicals? He's endangering groundwater with improper disposal techniques. Reynolds consulted his notepad. Mr. Carter hasn't added chemicals to the pool in over a week, and he's draining it according to city guidelines. There's no hazard present. Well, I'm sure there must be some violation, Patricia insisted, flipping frantically through her binder. What about noise ordinances? That power drill has been going all day. It's 4:30 p.m. on a Saturday, Martinez pointed out. Noise restrictions don't begin until 8 p.m., and standard home maintenance is permitted all day. Patricia's expression hardened, the pleasant facade crumbling. So you're just going to allow him to destroy neighborhood property values? I'm the secretary of the Neighborhood Enhancement Committee. Martinez sighed, his patience visibly wearing thin. Ms. Willoughby, we checked with the registered HOA for this subdivision. There is no official Neighborhood Enhancement Committee on file with the city or the HOA. It's a new committee, Patricia said defensively. We haven't completed all the paperwork yet. Regardless, Martinez continued, Mr. Carter is well within his rights to remove his own pool from his own property. There's no violation occurring here. This is outrageous, Patricia declared, her voice rising. I pay taxes in this city. I expect the police to enforce neighborhood standards. Officer Reynolds, who had remained relatively quiet, stepped forward. Ma'am, we enforce laws, not personal preferences. And speaking of laws, I should remind you that filing a false police report is actually an offense. Patricia's mouth opened and closed without sound. We're not saying that's what happened here. Martinez added diplomatically. We understand you had concerns, but in the future, matters like this should be handled through your HOA if applicable, not emergency services. And what if he does something else to his property? Patricia demanded, her voice slightly shrill now. What if he puts in, I don't know, a skateboard ramp or a chicken coop? As long as he complies with city zoning ordinances, that would be his right. Martinez explained patiently. Now we need to get back on patrol. Please refrain from calling emergency services for non-emergencies. Next time there could be consequences. The final word hung in the air between them. Patricia's face flushed deeper, a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. I understand, she said stiffly. As the officers turned to leave, Martinez paused. By the way, those no trespassing signs I noticed on the side of your house, they need to be at least 3 inches smaller to comply with city code. Just something to consider. Patricia's expression of shock was still visible as the officers made their way back to their cruiser, nodding politely to Michael, who was steadily working on rolling up the pool liner.